Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me at this conference, and thank you so much to the American Conservative and to American Moment for putting on this conference at this critical juncture in our nation's history. Right now, we are facing a massive threat, and I'm not just talking about the threat that is brewing in Ukraine and with Russia. It is a threat coming from right here in Washington, D.C. Our political establishment right now seems to be dead set on driving us into a catastrophic conflict with Russia or a conflict within our own economy. The Chinese Communist Party stands to benefit from everything that is transpiring right now in Ukraine, with Russia, and in the world markets. What's happening in Ukraine, make no mistake about it, is absolutely tragic. What Vladimir Putin has done by attacking Ukraine and launching this war is absolutely catastrophic. However, we cannot overlook the history of the region and the history of our involvement. And at the end of the day, what our true national security objectives must be in the big picture and must be within the scope of what's happening in Ukraine. So I would ask that we take a moment to step back from the day-to-day carnage that's transpiring in Ukraine and look at what our national interests are. Now, what's happening in Ukraine, as I said, it is absolutely tragic. The slaughtering of innocent civilians, the unprovoked military attack, that is definitely something that we should condemn in the strongest possible way. However, the U.S. government and the political establishment, we are not clean of involvement in this action. So the West has been pushing up onto the borders of Russia via Ukraine now for quite some time, most notably the 2014 Maidan Revolution. That the U.S. State Department, the U.S. government, at least encouraged, if not fully helped plan and execute. That brought this current regime into power. Putin or any pragmatic Russian leader would see this as a provocation right on their borders, because it is. The current Ukrainian government makes no bones about it. They want to join the European Union. They want to join NATO. This is a threat to Vladimir Putin. We would view the threat of Russian expansion on our borders to our north or to our south in the exact same way. So what's happened right now with Russia attacking Ukraine has resulted in the current carnage that we're seeing. Unfortunately, we have members of our national security establishment that think the thing that we need to do is to conduct some form of a military operation. Now, whether that is just sending in lethal aid or whether that's sending in actual combat power in the form of a no-fly zone or cyber attacks. These things are very dangerous. They are provocations. They will put us on a path to war with Russia, a nuclear-armed superpower. We have many in our national security establishment that seem to think that our last 2 decades of interventions in the Middle East, we can follow that exact same playbook in a place like Ukraine against an enemy like Russia. This, at every level, is pure insanity. Number one, our involvement in the Middle East only resulted in disaster after disaster that we're still paying the price for today. Our operations simply were not successful. As a veteran of those wars, I wish I could come to you today and say that those wars were successful. We have a template for dealing with these problems, and we should just continue to follow our tried and true playbook of supporting democracies wherever they may be, even if we have to manufacture them. However, the results don't lie. Despite all of our efforts, despite trillions spent, despite thousands of my brothers and sisters and even my late wife lying in Section 60 in Arlington National Cemetery, our current national security strategy has gotten us absolutely nowhere. So it's time for us to be sober and to be pragmatic and to think big picture and to think of new ways we can achieve our national security objectives. Right now, the number one threat that we have is not just blindly stumbling into World War III, which we are very close to doing. Just a few days ago, Joe Biden went to Europe to address U.S. troops that he had deployed there, and he was referring to them and saying, hey, when you get to Ukraine, and this is very dangerous, this isn't just loose talk, it's easy to laugh off because of Joe Biden's obvious mental decline, but our enemies are watching. He's telling troops that are sitting on the border of Ukraine, when you get to Ukraine, and he's deployed lots of troops to that region. We've deployed billions and billions of dollars of U.S. lethal aid that's being used to kill Russian troops right now. We have imposed crippling sanctions on Russia. We've kicked them off the SWIFT system. We've essentially kicked them out of the world economy. And we even have Joe Biden referring to Vladimir Putin as a war criminal. This language is very dangerous and very specific. Other people that have been referred to as war criminals recently, Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, Saddam Hussein of Iraq come to mind, and they met their demise at the hands of U.S. intervention and a brutal death at the hands of their own people. So when we speak to Putin this way, he is listening, and we are backing him into a corner where the only path to him breaking free from this is continued military intervention in Ukraine, continuing to slaughter the very same Ukrainians that we claim that we are supporting. We are also leading on the Ukrainians. We're telling Zelensky that, hey, maybe someday we're going to continue to send you more and more billions and billions of dollars of lethal aid, and if you keep pressuring us enough, maybe we'll put together a no-fly zone. There's elected members of our government, members of Congress, members of the Senate that are saying we should do a no-fly zone. Make no mistake about it. I know everyone in this room understands what a no-fly zone is. It is a shooting war within minutes between us and between Russia. It's absolutely catastrophic, and that shouldn't even be entertained. We also had Biden talking about chemical weapons. If chemical weapons were used, we would respond in kind, leaving it very wide open for interpretation what that exactly means. But that means there would be some form of a U.S. intervention. Again, we are 100% backing Vladimir Putin into a corner. This is going to lead to either a World War III style scenario or a prolonged continuation of the suffering in Ukraine, or most catastrophic for us, Russia will continue to march towards the Chinese Communist Party. All of their economic investments are already moving towards China. China is bankrolling this military intervention, and China is gaining the absolute most from this consolidation of the Eurasian economy. And they're challenging the US dollar. They're challenging our status as the prime reserve currency holder by consolidating their economy with Russia's economy. They're already starting to make inroads in OPEC. The Saudis have pretty much no other choice because we are trying to re-enter the Iran deal. They entered into the Abraham's Accord on good faith, knowing that the common enemy of Iran was something they needed to unify with the United States and with Israel against. Now that we're trying to let the Iranians not just receive sanctions relief, but also let them back into the petro market, they're opening up their petrodollar, they're opening their petro stores to the Chinese to purchase petro in yuan or even in gold. This right there is the death of the US petrodollar. As everyone in this room knows, we run entirely on debt. We stopped producing things long ago in our country, and we essentially rely on the Chinese Communist Party not just as our means of manufacturing, but we also rely on them to buy up our debt bonds. We are setting ourselves up for a financial Pearl Harbor in every sense of the word. If the Chinese attack our status as the prime reserve currency holder, we won't have to worry about what they're planning for Taiwan because they will be able to sink our economy without firing a shot. If you look at how the Chinese conduct warfare, this is how they fight. They fight via information warfare. They fight via economic warfare. So by us focusing everything on prolonging the conflict in Ukraine, not only is it wrong for what we're doing to the Ukrainian people, not only is it detrimental for the way that we could be marching towards a World War III with Russia, it is also handing the Chinese Communist Party the ability to take down all of our financial institutions and to take down the US dollar. We must be pragmatic. There is a clear path to peace in Ukraine. Putin has laid out what he wants in Ukraine. It's a decent starting point. Now, taking control of the provinces, the Russian-speaking provinces to the east of Donbass and Luhansk, that's very reasonable. Those provinces are already Russian-speaking and want to break off anyways. Having some form of a ceasefire and making those concessions to Putin is very reasonable. We should be very honest with Zelensky and say that no more aid is coming and the West will not come to your assistance, and you will never be part of NATO or the EU. The history of Ukraine is that it is a buffer state between whoever is in control of Russia and the European powers. That is the geography of the region. We can't change that. All of the Ukrainian flags and people's profiles can't change that. All the talk about democracy and standing up to Putin can't change that. All that can result is World War III or the crash of our financial system. So it is in everyone's best interest for us to be pragmatic in Ukraine. We also need to be reaching out to Putin and letting him know that there is a way to come back from these crippling sanctions, to keep him in the world economy, to keep him in the European economy, to keep him on the US dollar centered economy. If we don't do that, once again, we are handing this all over to China. I know lots of people are going to chastise us and say that we shouldn't be even discussing doing business with Vladimir Putin. The bottom line is we need to do everything we can to fight the consolidation of the Eurasian landmass under the Chinese Communist Party. To do that, we must pull Vladimir Putin economically away from their orbit. Ukraine is centered to doing that. Ukraine is central to us coming up with some form of a negotiated peace for Ukraine, but also a way to bring the Russians back into the world economy. The current rhetoric coming from Washington, D.C. is catastrophic, and we have to fight it tooth and nail. This is the exact same rhetoric that got us into regime change wars, the discussions of chemical weapons and red lines that we will cross. All of this is remnant of the lead up to the Iraq war based on lies. We know we're not getting the full picture of what's happening on the ground in Ukraine, but we have a very clear picture of what's happening here in Washington, D.C. in our Beltway. The same cast of characters that cheerled regime change war after regime change war, nation building endeavor after nation building endeavor, they're back at it again. And for very, very devious reasons. The vast majority of them, part of the Democrat apparatus, they want to distract from everything that's happening right here in America. All the failings, all the hyperinflation, the COVID narrative imploding. Ukraine and war is a great way for them to distract from that. The neocons on the right, they want back into another war, another final showdown where they can finally exercise their grand strategy of spreading democracy via the barrel of a gun. It didn't work in the Middle East, but maybe this time it will work in Ukraine. All they need is for us to risk our sons and daughters and the fortunes of our entire nation to do it. We have to take these people, we have to take the keys away from them. They have been drunk for way too long. They must be cut off. They're power drunk, they are bloodthirsty, and they cannot be trusted. Right now, what Congress is doing, what our ruling class is doing, is absolutely disastrous and irresponsible. Joe Biden is sleepwalking us towards war. Congress is derelict in their duties. They continue to fund more lethal aid going to Vladimir Putin. Members of Congress freely discuss no-fly zones. Lindsey Graham in the Senate discussing assassinating Vladimir Putin. All of these are massive escalations without the one thing that's dictated by the Constitution for Congress to do, and that is to actually have a war powers debate. Every single congressional representative and senator that feels strongly that we should be continuing this escalation in Ukraine needs to head back to their districts right now and sell it to their people and be brutally honest with them about what the costs will be for a war with Russia or an economic war with China. Right now, the American people see exactly what the failings of globalism are. They see the bare shelves. Just yesterday, Joe Biden was talking about how we're potentially going to have a food crisis here in America. We've never had food crises here in America. Not in two or three different generations have we experienced that. But now it's heading our way. The fuel crisis, the price at the pump that everyone is feeling. All of this is because of the failings of globalization. We were told that we could ship our supply lines overseas. We were told that we didn't need to produce gas and natural oil here in America, that someone else could do it. This was a pipe dream and a fallacy that created the monster of the Chinese Communist Party, and right now we are suffering from it. Our national endeavor for our generation must be to bring back our supply chains. It must be to be energy independent and energy net exporter, and for us to produce everything that we need for the survival and for the future of our people to be produced right here in America. This is a great American project. It's going to require us going after a lot of our elites who have benefited from this massive transfer of wealth, who've benefited from shipping our supply lines overseas. It's going to require us to educate our young people, our children, that they can go into the trades, they can work in factories, to bring back the honor of working with our hands, to bring back the honor of producing things here. These are the cultural changes that we will need to encourage and shepherd into this new era. The vision for foreign policy for the right, for the conservative movement, must be one of realism and restraint. We can no longer afford to be in the business of nation building or running around looking for a democracy to create, a democracy to prop up. We have to accept the world as it is. We have to accept geostrategic realities as they are. We have to have our own sovereignty at our southern border. We have to stop the Chinese Communist Party from pumping fentanyl to the Mexican cartels and from it being shipped into America, which is a complete and total assault on our people. Securing our border is part and parcel of securing our nation. The pragmatism and the realism that we need to look at the world with, it must start with this movement right here. And this is a great time to have these very difficult discussions. The failings of globalism are up in everyone's face at the gas pump and at the grocery store. And right now we have a chance to fight back against this deadly rhetoric coming from Washington, D.C. So I couldn't be more honored to speak here with all of you today. I couldn't be more honored to stand on this stage with everyone that's here. And I look forward to fighting this hard fight that we're going to have with the Republican Party, with the neocons, with the neolibs, and with this establishment here in Washington, D.C. But I think if we don't stand up and start having these fights, we are going to find ourselves in the midst of many, many wars. I fought for this country. I deployed 11 times. I served over 20 years. I lost countless friends. I lost my late wife. If we're going to gain anything from the sacrifices and from the blood and from the treasure of the last 20 years, we must learn hard lessons and move forward and not repeat the same mistakes that got us to this point right now. So I couldn't be more honored to be here. Thank you all very much. God bless you and God bless America.